Commissioner Chappelle,
Here.
Commissioner Swarzler,
Here.
Commissioner Middlestat,
Here, sorry.
that's okay. Commissioner Mahoney,
Here.
Commissioner Parskavis,
Here.
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
and Commissioner Cronin.
Here.
Complete.
All right. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the April 6th, 2020 meeting?
Yes.
That's a yes for everybody.
Yep.
Are there any corrections needed to be made?
No.
No corrections?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. If that's the case and everything looks fine, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes for April 6th, 2020.
I so move. This is Kate.
Second, this is
Okay.
Sally.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Opposed? Right, the minutes are approved. And we'll move on to visitor and public comments. I don't think, Karen, is there anybody in there that has any general comments that they need to make?
No, the two
Visitors.
speakers are both signed up for the 478 Main Street.
Okay. Then I will go ahead and I guess we're just going to reopen the public hearing. LA 2018-04, the historic code update. And Fred, you're still there, I take it.
Yep, I am. So let me just try something real quick. Hey, Jason, I'm on my phone too. Can I try and use my phone audio? Am I garbling up as it is, Jason? Am I doing good?
Seems okay.
Okay, then I'll just go from this. I can see you guys even though I don't have my my camera on. I got my phone here too, so I can see on my phone, and but I'm talking through my computer. So if it gets bad, I'll just try and maybe call in on my phone. So at the last meeting, you'll remember we were talking about the Historic Preservation Code update, LA 2018-04. And you'll remember that there was really one outstanding issue that we were talking about. That outstanding issue was how we want to deal with the historic residential overlay zone. And you will remember the picture of that, where specifically, I will try and share my screen here. Let's just see if we can see this here. You remember it was this this screen right here, and you'll remember that specifically we're asking about some of the setback requirements is really one of the questions that we had in some of these areas outlined in black. Now you'll remember that at your last meeting, the Historic Preservation Code had, or the Historic Preservation Commission asked for you folks to kick it to them to get their interpretation on how the language, the potential options for the language. The Historic Preservation Commission did look at that at their last meeting. Of the 4 options that I originally gave you, they felt like the language should stay the same. That is option 4 in your packet. On page 9 within your packet, option 4, keep the half block in the historic residential overlay zone and make no changes to the code. So that half block, you'll remember that we were talking about, was specifically here. So they came to the conclusion that the way that the language was written was the way that it should be, and they did not recommend any changes. Now, I imagine that you will hear more about that tonight. It sounds like both Commissioner Tidmore and Commissioner Flores are in the audience, and they no doubt will talk about that a little more. The vote on that was 4-2. there was a complete consensus among the Historic Preservation Commission that the area should be kept within the historic residential overlay zone. There was considerable discussion about whether that setback language should be tweaked. Eventually, the commission voted 4-2 that the language stayed the same. So just wanted to let you know that. There was also one change that the commission discussed. One of the things that I've been doing sort of because we have it on code is we have historic trees, right? And so I've been going out and analyzing where the historic trees are because it seems like a good idea to understand what you're regulating. And in the process of doing that, I realized that there's the way that the historic tree language within the code is written, we couldn't actually allow somebody to remove a tree for a potential development, right? And so the way that the language reads right now, and this is on page 13 of your packet, it talks about to approve the removal of a historic tree in the city of Independence. The Historic Preservation Commission must find that a certified arborist has shown that the tree is a hazard or the tree is causing damage to a commercial or residential structure. So you see there was, the way that it's drafted right now, there's really only two options. It's a hazard or it's causing damage to a commercial or a residential structure. What I realized in inventorying those historic trees is some of these historic trees are on completely vacant lots. They might be sitting right in the middle of the vacant lot. And they might not be a hazard per se, but if somebody went in to develop that site, there was no provision to actually allow somebody to go in there and develop the site if the tree was healthy and if it wasn't causing damage to a commercial or residential structure. So you'll see I added B there. That B is similar to the language for demolition of a commercial or a demolition of a historic structure elsewhere within the code. And so that's why I use that language. You'll note that that's verbatim for looking at a demolition in another part of the code. So that's part of why I added that. I did talk with the Historic Preservation Commission about that potential, and they were completely in favor of adding that language. So they do forward that language change, that small language change to you with a unanimous recommendation as well. So basically, those are the two things that you're going to be considering tonight as you're continuing forward in this this public hearing on the Historic Preservation Code update. Those are really the two issues that you're going to be dealing with. But if there's anything else that you see in the code that needs to be addressed, just bring that up as well. Are there any questions?
Right now, I'd like to interrupt, excuse me, Mr. Evander, but I would like to make clear that Jennifer Flores is speaking as a resident in the district and not as a commission member.
Thank you very much, Karen.
I have a question about the trees. Is this an okay time to ask?
Yeah.
Okay, so when it says causing damage to commercial or residential structure, I'm thinking about, is it on B Street where they moved the sidewalk, or they basically went into the street because the tree, you couldn't have the sidewalk there anymore? How would that work, for instance, if that's not a possibility? So does the sidewalk qualify as a structure?
No, I would anticipate that it does not qualify as a structure.
So for instance, I live on Monmouth Street, which is an ODOT highway designation road, and I have a historic tree, and I very much anticipate that very soon this sidewalk is also gonna, what happened on B Street would happen here. So I'm only using that as an example because what we have here proposed would not help us define what to do here.
Right, right. I understand what you're saying. Definitely, this language that we're proposing to add would definitely add more latitude in situations like that than is currently in the draft. So, I mean, yeah, definitely.
Any other questions of Fred? No other questions? Okay, Fred, at this time, should we go ahead and start calling the folks in who want to speak?
Yes, that would be perfect.
Karen, if you'd like to invite either John or Jennifer, whoever would like to come in and speak, that'd be great.
Chair Chappelle, you just need to announce their names
Oh, both of them then, Karen?
if they both want
Okay.
to.
John and Jennifer Flores, they come in and speak.
Yeah, they're coming.
You guys hear me okay? I don't hear them, Karen. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. First,
Okay.
because I like to address what other people say. And I am here as a resident who lives next door to 478 Main Street. And so we have concerns with what is going to happen on the property next door to my house. We have been in town about 6 years, so not a super long time, you know. We haven't grown up here in those things, but my daughter has been going to school here. She's a senior this year. She should have graduated on June 5th. And when I moved here, I completely bought in. I learned all about independence. I bought Marilyn Morton's book. I became a ghost host the month after I got here, and I love the historic feel of our town. It's probably my favorite thing next to the people who live here. As time went on and now dealing with what's happening next door at 478, I have been forced by my own curiosity and stubbornness, tenacity, I don't know, to do a lot of research on zones and, you know, besides the Historic Preservation Commission or overlay zone, since I'm on that committee, but I'm here as just a resident. Anyways, I had to do lots of research, and I know more about zones now than I ever thought I would. And it turns out we live in 3 different overlays on my block, and 2 of them are 100% contradictory to each other. The downtown overlay and the historic overlay are completely, they contradict each other. The downtown overlay says that any new structure needs to be built to the build to line of the property, you know, the property line, which would mean that Mr. Harris needs to build all the way out to the sidewalk. My driveway is on Main Street. If he builds a building, especially a 3-story building, which is a whole nother story, out to the sidewalk, that creates a safety issue for me leaving my driveway. There are kids, there are adults who ride their bikes up and down that sidewalk, and if I can't see to the south, you know, I mean, it's not like I come tearing out my driveway, but that's a safety issue, and that's a concern to both my husband and myself because we just have the one driveway. I wanted to say that, you know, clearly long before we got here, and I don't know how long any of you have been on the commission, the planning committee, when the 20-year plan was drawn up, it looks like it was done without regard to the families, lives, and homes of the people living on Main Street. It was done without regards to our homes. And there's nothing we can do to change that now, but I can be sure to fight for us not to have to live with, you know, things that just do not fit next to my 1914 Craftsman and my neighbor's 1910 or 1901 Craftsman. And so that's part of why I'm here. Mr. Harris is doing a fine job communicating with us as residents of Independence. I think that, you know, I like speaking with him. I hope that he likes speaking with me. He seems to be very cooperative. And I was one of the naysayers on I was one of the two that did not vote for option 4, because I feel like this 20-year plan that was put in place, whenever it was put in place, it looks like whoever was part of that thought that they were going to be able to just push all those homes out, tear them down, turn them into whatever they wanted to, make it look like downtown should come all the way down here to the Civic Center, instead of respecting the homes that are there. And part of the beauty and the charm of Independence is this wonderful historic downtown area that we have, and these beautiful historic homes that we have here in town. So I just wanted to make sure that my feelings as the person living next door to where this issue is being decided is known, because it's bad enough I'm going to have to look out my front window at those god awful ugly block buildings across the street. I don't want that out my side window too. And so I felt like we need to make our voices known as residents living next door to this proposed development, and also that there are safety concerns and contradictions in all the zones that cover the blocks that we're discussing. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know.
I have one question, if that's all right.
Sure.
I guess in your sort of in your brain, in your mind, you personally, where do you see? I guess, you know, there's a city like Independence that is constantly it's going to be it's expanding. We've had this increase in population, and you know, downtown has changed quite a bit in the last 15 or 20 years. Where do you see the sort of downtown expanding to, or sort of how do you see an expansion, or do you see just a freeze frame in your mind of yeah? So I'm just curious what that looks like.
Well, in my mind, what I would have hoped was that downtown would have expanded towards the river, and then you put housing here. I mean, we have housing going in down 7th. We have housing on Gun Club, which I realize is Monmouth. We're building housing everywhere. You know, we just had those giant apartments built up 51 River Place apartments, and now we're doing the same thing across the street, where I think that if you wanted to expand downtown, you have much more room on the riverfront zone than you have in these 2 short blocks before you get to Henry Hill's house, you know. And Henry Hill's kind of a big deal around here.
Yeah, I'm not discounting that. I'm just wondering if your master planning, sort of in your mind.
My master planning.
Yeah.
Master planning would be, I understand that change occurs, and I understand that there are folks like Mr. Harris and the company that he works with that's what they do, and that's their job. And I've had nice conversations with Mr. Harris. I don't begrudge him his business. I just want to make sure that whatever goes in here retains respect for the personality. Sorry about that. you know, retains respect for our really cute little downtown area and the character and the charm that it has now. So yeah, it's going to grow. I know that it's going to grow, and I'm not fighting that it's going to grow. It's probably going to grow across the street from me too, you know, where that blue house is. But it needs to grow in a way that is complementary to the people and the homes that still stay there, and not like what we have going on the riverfront. That's my concern.
All right, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Any other questions for Mrs. Flores? Okay, if no other questions, would Mr. Flores like to speak?
I just had a quick comment, especially towards the last question that was presented. I'm not a member.
Hold on. Can you hold on just 1 second?
Sure.
Can you like figure out a way to turn up the volume on that computer there? It seems like the volume coming in pretty low. Is it low for everybody else?
Yes.
Okay, and I did get a little bit closer. So is this better?
That's better.
Okay, and it's just a quick comment. I'm not a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. I'm just a resident and a citizen, but it strikes me as curious that it seems that the goals of some of the, or of the commission seem to be different. And so it makes me wonder if the plan is to grow, obviously, you know, that's unavoidable. I guess just in layman's terms, why have a historic commission if we're just going to override things and get rid of significant historic homes and buildings due to growth and expansion? I mean, why bother have any say at all if it's just going to not be listened to, and these homes that have been here for over 100 years are just going to, you know, it seems that the plan is that they intended to just get rid of them anyway. So that's just a comment I have. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, okay. I can respond if I'd like to respond. Just that wasn't a pointed question. It's sort of like we're gonna, you know, or my intent was to say bulldoze everything or whatever. I just curious, how do you, what
Right.
the thought process was to square, I mean, just personally, like to square both expansion but then also historic preservation. So I just wanted to just a curious question.
Yeah, and it wasn't a direct response to your question. It's something that I've asked Jennifer about and just questioned myself. So I just thought, all right, I'll throw it in right there because it kind of segued into that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. Any other questions for the Floreses?
But I have one more thing to say.
Okay.
Hey, Jennifer,
ahead.
can you speak louder? Like
Yeah.
really, okay.
Okay. So if you were looking for like a suggestion from me before and I misunderstood, you know, John and I have discussed these things at home, and quite frankly, we discussed them with Mr. Harris because we live there, and so we discussed things with him as residents next door to the place he's looking to develop. And I'm not sure, this is where like that weird crossover thing is, because I'm on the Historic Preservation Committee, so hopefully I don't say anything out of line, or I don't know. I'm trying not to break any rules, but that's where like I was one of the nays votes on the commission because I am willing to cooperate and, I don't know, give in certain areas. Like I don't feel like the setback of his building needs to be as far back as my house because it's in the historic overlay. But it certainly shouldn't be all the way to the build-to line of the sidewalk because it's in the downtown area. So, you know, I'm willing to, what's that thing?
Cooperate?
Yeah, no, when we meet in the middle, like,
Well,
you know, I'm willing to meet in the middle with development because I know it's going to happen, and I'd rather, it's more important to me that what goes in matches my home and doesn't look like what's on the riverfront than, you know, making sure that it's built out to the road or built to match the setback of my own home.
So Jennifer, would you be more in favor of option 3?
I was more in favor of option 3, but I was outvoted.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you folks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I will call Mr. King.
Hey,
And if
Gordon,
Hello, Fred.
make sure to really talk loud if you can, Gordon, okay?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, but if you were even just a little louder, it would be that much better.
Okay, my name is Gordon King, and I'm reside at 5166 Cobb Lane in Salem. And I've worked with the folks that own this property for a number of years, and I've been really fortunate to actually work on some projects here recently in Independence. And I think one of the things that I've been very impressed with in the city of Independence, because I've studied a couple of the vision plans and some of the codes. And like Mrs. Flores, I probably know more about zones in Independence than I ever thought I would know as well. But this property, what we're at 478 Main Street, one of the things that has happened is that we really have gone through a lot of what we think are the vision plans for the city of Independence for the downtown area. And I believe that Mr. Harris bought this property knowing that there was going to be some design challenges and some things that were a little bit different than in other properties we may improve or develop. I don't know, Fred, were you able to share any of our notes that we shared with you last week with the commission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
we can forward those to the commission as requested.
okay, thank you. What we're hoping for is to continue our improvement proposal as we've designed it under the current zoning, which is the MUPC. Do I remember that right, Fred?
That's right.
One of the great things about the Vision 2020 plan is that it addresses so many things about the growth. I mean, I can't believe that from 2008 to now, 2020, we're here already. We've seen a lot of changes. This latest in the last 8 weeks has been a huge change, but the 2020 plan that the City of Independence worked on with the stakeholders, the citizens, the city officials, and even consultants, looks like it was a huge body of work. And if you look at what we're presenting in our improvement proposal, a lot of this we're plagiarizing from your 2020 plan and the current mixed-use pedestrian-friendly commercial zone, MUPC zone. And the first one is just the site. You can read along there with me. You can tell me if this gets too redundant or boring, but we have worked a lot on that site, understanding the build-to lines. If we understand the build-to lines, off-street parking, because the building we're proposing, the improvement we're proposing, is going to be a commercial mixed use. And a lot of the things that we're working on the site is, like I say, just strictly out of the design guidelines from that particular zone. Number 2 is the height building massing. The proposed building will not exceed 45 feet in height. The main entrances will be provided on the front face of the building. Again, our vision was to match a lot of what it looked like the City of Independence wanted to preserve in their historic downtown core. And so if we look at the build-to lines, the alcoves, and some of the architectural designs, and we'll go to number 3, the building design would incorporate residential roof designs. And frankly, we started off thinking that we wanted to do a parapet, but in that block, we really it looks like traditional roof designs would be more appropriate. So we're flexible as we can with this improvement proposal to sort of match not only what we think is the historic overlay goals, but the neighborhood that's existing there now. So we're looking at residential roof designs, transom windows, awnings, alcoves, decorative lighting, and a lot of other features that keep that historic feel of the downtown area. You guys will know this next section better than I will, but that downtown overlay district design standards is in your Vision 2020 plan is really complete, and in your historic overlay, it's very complete, and in the MUPC zone, very complete, and the design guidelines are really complete. There is a lot of detail in how you guys want, or the City of Independence wants these buildings to look. So if the improvements need to be done or can be done in the City of Independence, it seems clear to me that you guys know what you want to see out of those improvements. So those are the 5 points that I've put down under the downtown overlay district design standards. Really, I couldn't hardly even build on those because they were very descriptive, and I thought it was very well articulated what the vision for the City of Independence would like. So with that, I will answer any questions that you guys might have.
I had a quick question, Gordon. What, so the option 3 that was proposed was sort of a mid-range setback versus straight to the sidewalk, build to the line. Does that completely complicate everything? Does that ruin the project? What's your?
We've discussed that flexibility and what those options would be as far as the build to line. What we think, one of the things that's in the code is having, I don't know what to call it, but it's sort of like the bank building. You have these corner recesses. Thinking about the Flores' entrance and exit coming out of the building, we thought there had to be a sight vision, a line of vision, at least looking to the right, past and around the building, which meant at least on that side, on the north side of the building, that would have to be set back farther than the build to line. But the way you guys have your design code, it looks like what you would do is probably put a post, a decorative post in there, a column, and then have a clear sight of vision by cutting the corner away. And I know I'm getting a little bit into the weeds, but that's what you sort of have to do with all of these overlays, is really try to dig in the weeds. I'm a little bit like Mrs. Flores, only in the point of there's a lot of layers that are in this. But I got to tell you, it's very well thought out. I jokingly said the last time I came in front of Fred, I jokingly said, Fred, that why don't you guys just build a building? And you sort of do. You sort of do. And that takes a lot of the questions and the guesswork. When we're doing it on our side, we say, well, tripart fronts and columns and alcoves and pedestrian and pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly. You start weaving, but when you drive up and down Main Street, you start seeing all the improvements and the expense that the City of Independence has put in to meet their own vision. And it sort of tells us as developers and that you're very serious about those vision guidelines and those design guidelines. Sort of behooves the developer to say, we want to incorporate all of that into our building. So if you see, do you have the building illustration that we threw out there too? We went to that expense just for not only ourselves, but for you guys to say, we're trying to see if we aren't capturing the feel of what that zone is already. So it's not a perfect illustration, but we're hoping it incorporates a lot of what's in those overlays now. So I didn't answer your question about about whether 3 was completely throwing us off. I don't think it is, but I also think that there's ways to take to demand that a building that's built there it has the safety for the neighbors and all of the design standards that's already there in the MUPC zone. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions for Mr. King? All right, well, thank you then, Mr. King.
Okay.
Okay, I'll call Mr. Tidmore.
Good evening. And can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm here representing the Preservation Commission. And the first bit I'm going to talk about is going to recap a little bit of what Fred spoke earlier. At our last meeting, we were looking at this residential overlay map. It was a unanimous consensus that the residential overlay map should remain. The only discussion we had that there was any contention on was whether there should be less restrictive language, which would allow some flexibility in the design standards, specifically with setbacks. It was a 4-2 vote. The 2 dissenters were our junior members that were present, and also one of the negative votes, the nay votes, was actually a property owner in one of the 4 properties that were affected by this request. As far as why we decided that it should stay in the residential overlay, if you look at the block, it's very residential in flavor. Currently Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, there's 4 parcels and there's 3 primary contributing structures.
I think that's correct. Yep.
So it's a very residential block, and the commission felt it should stay that flavor. One thing I feel like I've got to bring up, because I keep hearing all this discussion about a project. You're talking about a project that is on a property that nothing can be done right now. There's a primary contributing structure right there. There had been an application for demolition. There was no evidence that was moving the board toward granting it, and we were moving toward a stay. They withdrew the application. Currently, there's no application in front of us. So that's three primary contributing residential structures on a block and 1 vacant lot. One thing I kept hearing a question about was how do people envision the downtown growth? I've lived in a lot of historic cities and towns, and in most of them, the historic downtowns did not expand. We've got a lot of infill still to go. I'm not so sure that that's a narrative that's really, this is going outside what the commission spoke about, but I'm bringing it up because I'm hearing it now tonight. I don't necessarily think that we should look at it as that's a de facto thing, that the downtown has to expand. I agree the city needs more commercial property, but that doesn't necessarily mean the downtown has to expand. I just thought I'd throw that out there. So I'm here basically for any questions you might have about our recommendation.
Okay. Any commissioners have any questions of Mr. Tidmore? No questions?
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tidmore.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. If I go ahead and close the public hearing, Fred, can we still come back and ask you questions? Or do we need to do it
Yes.
right? Okay. Well, if that's the case, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. And we'll leave it up to the commission now. So what are everyone's thoughts here? Thoughts? Any?
I do have some thoughts. I am in favor of keeping that area residential in nature. I think in terms of expansion, that would be fitting to, I mean, the sketches, I realize that there's no project. I think that is a good point to bring up. There is no actual project on the table. So I'm trying not to let that sway me in the sense of I'd rather look at it and make a good decision that's based on the best outcome for planning and for the community, regardless of a project being on the table or not. I think the historic nature, which is residential, of that area should be preserved. For my thoughts, that sort of development is more fitting on the riverside. And then I think also in terms of expansion of downtown, if that is to occur, there's opportunities going back towards the post office, parallel 45, movie theater, that are also logical ways, I think, for new development, and in maybe in some cases more fitting for that development to actually be incorporated into the community.
Okay. Any other thoughts by commission members? So I am in agreement with Kate on this. I think option 4 is the best choice, keeping it residential. Okay, any other commission members have any feelings on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And also kind of echo what Kate said. It's hard not to consider something that's in the picture, but it really is not, in the sense that it's not an application for us to consider or anything like that. And so I, keep going back to the discussions and the planning and the things that were had up until this stage that had us leaving it included in there, or including it in there, I mean. And so I agree, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I would agree that option 4 makes sense for the reasons I think that it was intended.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Anyone else?
This is Sally. I think the reminder is good for us to remember there is no project currently. It's a good point. I appreciate that point being made.
So a quick question to you, Fred. The gentleman, Mr. Harris, owns that parcel of land, right? A piece of property.
Yep.
So he could develop it still for to make money or whatever he plans to do with it. So without this kind of building that's first floor commercial, second, third floor residential, he would be able to come up with some use of the property that would fit with staying with option 4 in the Historic Preservation Code, correct?
Right. So I mean, essentially, when we look, let me just take a step back so we all know, so we all get what really their question was about. So the Historic Preservation Commission definitely said, you know, options 1 and 2, where they were taking it out of that historic residential overlay, was not something that they wanted.
Right.
And I think that that was an appropriate way of handling that property. So they really came down on should we tweak the language in option 3 a little bit to allow some additional flexibility and setbacks within these historical overlay zones. And you can see how that language is on page 9 there. And then the other option that they really were talking about is, do we want to keep it in there and keep language exactly the same, which is essentially that if there's other residential buildings on the block, you have to set your building within the range of setbacks of those buildings. And so the question that they were really considering was, is that range of setbacks appropriate, or is there additional flexibility that is desired? Now, based on all of that, the question then becomes, back to Corby's question, is something developed on the site? Yes, something could absolutely be developed on the site. It's just going to have to maintain the setbacks and sort of the building articulation of the neighboring structures. So it might appear it might appear residential in nature, have a residential form, but it's going to have potentially commercial use on the bottom, potentially residences above still. Is just going to have to meet those form requirements. Now, another complete possibility that might happen is somebody might go into that site and develop housing on the lot too, because single family residential is allowed within that zone. So that is a possibility as well too. Like somebody could conceivably go in and develop single family houses on the site too. So this is not saying what type of development is going to happen on the lot. It's not saying that residential development must occur. What it is saying is whatever development occurs must appear residential in nature to complement the residences near the vacant lot, or near the vacant lot, and then the house next to it. I say vacant lot because this is not only going to apply to this half block. Your considerations are going to apply to all the historic residential overlay blocks that I identified at the start of
Fred, can you put that map back up on your screen so we can see like the bigger?
You bet. 1 second. Where is it? Oh, please hold. Can you see it? Okay.
Yep.
So you can see all of these as we're having this conversation. Yeah, I know that we're tending to talk about one area and one project, but I mean, really the consideration would then apply to each of these areas as well.
And I think that's appropriate based on kind of knowing where those blocks are. And I think to me, in my mind, it's a similar kind of residential neighborhood feel.
I feel like having a little bit of flexibility in the setbacks, that a commercial structure would still be residential in feel, but maybe have that little bit of footage it needs if it needs the parking lot on the backside or something, might allow for more flexibility. But that's my opinion. And I don't have all of these blocks memorized as far as what the other spots look like as we look at the expanded map.
You have any thoughts, Alex?
I don't really actually. I mean, I have thoughts. I'm sort of weighing what I want. I worry for this block kind of specifically. It applies to the whole thing. I just worry sort of like it's not probably going to get changed ever. And so what does this look like in a 20 or 30 year, time span, right? Or like, what is that? And so I think I'm in favor of flexibility as well, but I absolutely understand the concern in maintaining the vibe of what it is. And I guess despite my comments or my questions rather, they weren't meant to be pointed or around, oh, downtown's expanding and we're on this mission or I'm on this mission or anything else. I'm just curious what people's thoughts are when it comes to expand, just a city, a town that's growing, or has been at least, and sort of what that might look like. But I totally appreciate the comments of sort of there's plenty of infill sort of spots left. And so, there is flexibility. So I guess I'm conflicted is really kind of what I'm getting at.
Natasha, what are your thoughts?
I feel a lot like Alex does actually, because I can picture lots of different scenarios, all of which I think can meet the way downtown looks, but have different uses. And for me, I think I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the residents of what if that was my house and that was happening next door. But I also very much feel like you have to look beyond right now. And if we were thinking that way 30 years ago, Independence wouldn't look the way it does today. So yeah, I'm torn as well. I think the fact that it has to look residential is good, but I still, if I were a resident and then ended up with a residential style looking building 3 stories high next to me, even though that meets the code, that's probably not what they wanted as a neighbor. So yeah, I don't have any good answers. I think Kate made a really good point, but I also am quite conflicted.
Yeah, this is more difficult than I thought it would turn out to be, actually. So what I'm understanding is half of the commissioners would be in favor of option 3 and half option 4. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah, seemingly.
Okay.
I think the point though that Natasha just made too of like the residential in flavor, but 3 stories tall, that's a little bit hard to square in my mind, just slightly. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Kate, do you?
So you'll remember. I'm sorry. Let me just jump in here. This is Fred. So hey,
yeah.
You'll remember that because this is, what you guys are addressing is completely what the intent of what this overlay is trying to do. This overlay is trying to do is identify that, hey, the zoning offers the opportunity for some pretty significant conflicts next to single family residences, right? And this is really to identify how new buildings can be good neighbors to the buildings next to them. And so you'll remember that in the high section, it says when where a larger structure is proposed adjacent to a historic single-family home, the structure is stepped down in height to the height of the neighboring home. So the idea is you sort of like height away from the home and then step it down to the home to just be a better neighbor to that to that historic home next to it. So that's really, what you guys are really wrestling with here is what the code is trying to do is how can new structures in a growing and changing community be good neighbors to the historic structures next to them.
Okay. Does that change anybody's mind?
So this is Sally. I think for me, the question is, does the historic residential overlay zone have enough of those kinds of checks and balances in it? Like Fred was just explaining about the set down of the height of the building. Are there enough of those checks and balances in there to be able to retain the historic residential flavor, regardless of what's being built next door? And I think I feel comfortable that it does.
So, hey, what I'll do is let me pull up just the code one more time so you can re-look at it, just so you guys are all feeling, all remembering what is there. So just give me 1 second to pull up the code. So, oh, I'm gonna do it this way. Hold on 1 second. Just 1 second. Sorry, everybody. All right, so let me try and share my screen again. Uh-oh, there it is. All right, so you remember, here's the draft historic preservation code. And you'll remember that when it gets down to where it's starting to talk about this, I'm sorry, let me scroll down. When it's talking about especially this new construction in historic district, you remember that it has specific pictures, right? You'll see right there, scale, mass, and proportion, right? The building includes projections and building articulation that breaks the mass of the building into smaller components. It talks about how we would like, we wouldn't like things like this because stuff like that appears too big in scale, right? But what we're looking for instead, and I'm sorry if that's having trouble loading on you, is stuff that, where is it at? Right, so it breaks the box-like forms into smaller varied masses, all that stuff. And then these things on the left side of the page are then so if you'll remember that. You guys remembering that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I don't know if you guys want to look at that just a little more, but I mean, this is really what this overlay zone is trying to do. I'm sorry, my computer's having trouble with the pictures for some reason right now. So anyways.
So my take is with option 4, Mr. Harris will still be able to develop his piece of property, but just not to the magnitude that he wants to. It maintains more of a residential feel. Whereas option 3, he could develop it more to what he wants on a larger dimension. Is that correct, Fred?
The two, I mean, really, fundamentally, the difference between the two languages is really, it boils down to setback. It's the design of the building will stay, I mean, could potentially be exactly the same, but the question then boils down to where the lot is it going to be set, right? If that makes sense. Essentially, option 4 says you have to set it within the range of the setbacks
for the
of the buildings next to it. Option 3 says that there is some flexibility to go outside of that range, but again, it would be subject to approval of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Well, then I guess now I'm confused. Why would Mrs. Flores say that if she would have her property, it'd be a danger for her to come out of her driveway? I mean, she says, I mean, they could actually move it closer to the sidewalk with option 3 then, with the setbacks?
Yeah, they could move it closer to the sidewalk with option 3. I think what she was really talking about is how the MUPC zone right now and the downtown overlay zone, which is not as part of this code, this is underlying zoning. Right now, they could build to the front property line, right under that code. Now, I'll just say that the Historic Preservation Code right now also conflicts with that because it says that you have to keep a new building would have to complement the setbacks of the neighboring buildings. Now, what complement the setbacks means exactly is subject to debate, but I mean there is that tension in the code right now.
Well, with the overlay in place, though, the Historic Preservation Code would supersede the MUPC code then.
Right, especially in that regard. What essentially would happen is they would both sort of modify each other and give a set of standards for specifically how people can develop in areas like this that are zoned commercial but are characterized by historic residential structures.
Okay. Does that clarify it anymore for the commissioners?
I think that does help, because I think we are still looking at, I tended to look at this as option 4 was no flexibility and option 3 was. So that was a helpful reminder looking back at some of that stuff, Fred, thank you, because you know, I do think that option 4, leaving those things as a certain look, is there for a reason, and that was, if I'm remembering right, what was unanimously agreed by the Historic Preservation. So I think it makes sense from that standpoint. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is in my mind, it makes sense for the reasons that were intended. And then it does have some flexibility. It might not have some of the flexibility that this possible project would maybe need if that were to be what was proposed to move forward. But I do still think it does have flexibility to meet those requirements. So anyway, I got a little off track there. Sorry.
It's okay. No, that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I think I'm with Kevin on this.
Natasha?
I don't have any other, what Fred did really helped.
Okay.
The reminders were good.
Tori?
The reminders were helpful. I'm kind of conflicted. The resident on the street said she was okay with option 3, but and I don't know if it has to be unanimous. I still lean a little bit that way.
Okay.
We look at a city that's growing as fast as it is, knowing that there's infill in some other areas that commercial can move to first, but just thinking about some of the other areas that might change as well.
Okay. Any other questions to ask Fred before I entertain a motion? No other questions? Okay, who wants to take a stab at the motion to recommend to the city the approval with the historic tree language? There is something under recommendations in the staff report. that would help for a motion. Anyone? Anyone? Mueller? I didn't quit my job as in the entertainment industry yet, so I'm trying again.
I can fumble my way through it.
Okay.
Or I'll try to fumble my way through it, right? So we
Right,
need
Kate.
a motion that adopts or approves option 4 and also adds in, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth on my screens here. So option 4 to address concerns with historic residential overlay on 400 block of Main Street, as well as adding in language to the Historic Preservation Code, changes regarding the removal of historic trees, 59.110, which is to approve the removal of a historic tree in the City of Independence via an IDC subchapter 11 type 2 procedure. The Historic Preservation Commission must find that A, a certified arborist has shown that the tree is a hazard or the tree is causing damage to a commercial or residential structure, and also adding in B, there is demonstrated public need for the proposed new use or development on the site that outweighs any public benefit that might be gained by preserving the subject trees. There's probably a much quicker way to do that.
Does that make sense to you, Karen?
Yes, so what I have as a motion is Commissioner Sorsler moved to recommend that the City Council recommend to the City Council that they approve LA 2018-4, utilizing option 4 in the staff report, and also approving suggested language regarding the removal of historic trees as recommended by staff.
Yes, that was the quicker way to do it.
Do I have a second?
This is Kevin. I'll second that, please.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay for the.
Nay.
So we have
Middlestat, was that it? And Paraskevas?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, motion passes. Okay. Let's move on to new business. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing LA-2020-02 amendments to Independence Developmental Code accessory dwelling units. And I take it before the staff report, Fred, you'll read the script, please.
You bet. I'll do that. Hold on. I printed it off. I have to grab it off the printer.
Okay.
All right. And I apologize if I'm garbled. Hopefully it comes through. All right. This evening, the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on legislative amendment LA 2020-02 to consider amendment of the Independence Development Code. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. The proceedings are recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. At the beginning of the public hearing tonight, staff will identify the applicable substantive criteria from the city's comprehensive plan and or state of Oregon statewide rules. For any wishing to speak, we are asking you to use the speaker cards that are provided. When called upon to speak, you must be recognized by the chair and you must state your name and address for the public record. Before we begin, does any commissioner wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest in this matter?
Corby says, no, I have none.
Perfect. And then you say, I will now open the public hearing for LA 2020-02, Corby.
Okay, I will now open the public hearing for LA-2020-02. And with that, I bet you can give us a staff report, please.
That's right. These changes are changes to the accessory dwelling unit standards. These are required by state law. There's a couple of recent changes to state law to mandate that cities allow accessory dwelling units. We went through as the commission and we looked at our current standards. You'll remember that. And we identified some things that could either be modified or changed. Some of the things that we removed were things like, you'll remember in the current code. One says something like 800 square feet, and the other says something 800 square feet or the greater than, or it had to be 800 square feet, and then it had to be something like the secondary structure combined. And it's like, we felt like that just made sense to make that one single standard. Also, you'll remember that we applied things like the design standards, made it clear that those standards did apply to accessory dwelling units as well. We also included provisions that said no off-street parking is required. That is a requirement in state law, so we incorporated that. We also just made it clear that you needed a foundation, you need to meet electrical, fire, and plumbing requirements, and that you also needed, how some of the things related to utilities would work. We also, the last thing I'll just say is we also said that system development charges would be applied to an accessory dwelling unit at the same level as the second unit of the duplex. We went through the normal process for this code change. We sent to the state quite a while ago. Did hear just something today from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. They specifically asked us to consider this change in regards to the Goal 10 requirements required under the state of Oregon planning goals. We did not include Goal 10 findings in our staff report, and because of that, they're asking us to postpone this until we actually consider this in light of Goal 10. So that was their main argument. They also encouraged you folks to consider increasing the maximum size for ADUs above that 800 square feet. They also asked you to consider to forego the requirement that an ADU have a foundation. To forego the, I don't quite understand, allow front yard and duplex ADUs to be permitted. I don't see why they wouldn't be permitted. They also asked for you folks to consider waiving the SDCs or reducing the system development charges for accessory dwelling units. So those were their 4 requests. Finally, they said, though, that they felt like we needed to evaluate this under Goal 10 planning requirements. So I guess based on that, I still think we're consistent with Goal 10 planning requirements. We're actually increasing the potential for people to build different housing units in the city. I mean, it's just clear we're giving people additional options to build that should increase the availability of housing. But if they're asking us to go through that requirement, I think that we can honor that. We can bring those Goal 10 requirements to you at your next meeting. Basically, though, staff feels very comfortable with this. We think that this is a good change. We think that that the things in here make a lot of sense. We see that, yeah, potentially we could increase the size of ADUs that are allowed if you want to do. But I guess staff would recommend that we not monkey with the SDCs for the system development charges for accessory dwelling units. at least in part because, you know, if somebody's building a duplex, we're going to charge them those fees. And so at what point does accessory dwelling unit look different than a duplex? And why would we charge more for a duplex than an accessory dwelling unit? So anyways, those are my thoughts. That's basically the process that we've went through to get it to this point. Are there any questions about that?
So if we were to go ahead and approve this tonight without postponing it until the goal 10 requirements are further explained to us or whatever, I mean, the city would be meeting the requirements in the two laws, the Senate Bill 1051 in 2017 and House Bill 2001 in 2019, correct?
Yeah, that's fundamentally what, I mean, we're trying to address those things. And I mean, just conceptually, we're adding more opportunities for people to build housing. You know, so I mean, I understand that they want us to do the analysis, and I did correspond with the folks that submitted the letter, and I said, oh, you know, I forgot to do that. I'll make sure to have those in by the city council public hearing. And I got this letter today, and they said they're requesting a decision on it until those findings are available.
Okay, so if we passed it tonight, would they be sending the same letter to city council then? For them to not act upon it, or do you know?
You know, I have no idea. I imagine that the packet that went to the city council would include this letter.
Okay. What kind of legal action could the Fair Housing Council come back on the city, if anything, once we were to pass this?
You know, I don't know if they would appeal a planning commission recommendation. I don't know if that would make any sense because the same hearing body is going to hear it at next stage. And, you know, if it's addressed by the city council at the next stage, I mean, I feel like their concerns would be addressed at stage. So I don't know practically, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't know practically what doing these goal 10 requirements does for us if we do them now versus in a month, you know, or if
Fred, I
we
have
do
a
them
question
now or
for you.
at the council level.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
question just from a timing standpoint. If we're pretty comfortable that when the report is done or when that is looked at, that it'll fall within where we expect it to, for the sake of moving this forward, to presumably make those options for people to do this available sooner, would it be possible for us to just move it forward tonight, knowing that that work you're going to be doing will be done before the city council sees and considers the next step? Would that be an appropriate?
Yeah, well, I mean, you folks could even recommend something. You can make a recommendation with the condition that goal 10 findings would be made before the city council.
That would,
and I think that
sorry.
makes sense.
Okay, I gotcha. That makes sense. And I think especially if that's the only thing holding us back, and that's the same thing that would be holding the next piece of this at the city council into consideration in their conversation, I think that makes sense.
Okay, and the last thing, Fred, I don't understand the front yard. I mean, if we adopt this, would we allow ADUs in front yards then for sure, even though the Fair Housing Council wants us to do that?
Well, you know, I don't see, honestly, let me just see.
And I find it kind of odd that ADUs would be in front yards, but
I honestly don't think that it says. I honestly don't know where it says that it's required to be in a backyard. I don't see it.
okay. Well, I guess that in our discussions about ADUs, this hasn't come up, but when I read that today, that the Fair Housing Council would like us to allow front yard ADUs, I kind of thought to myself, well, I mean, I can't put one in my front yard. I'd have no front yard. And then I guess if I look across the street, I really wouldn't want to walk out of my house every day and look at a miniature house. I mean, you can't put your travel trailer in front of your house. I mean, during the summer, I keep mine out there for a few days at a time in between camping trips, but it's not permanently out there. So would that be something that, I mean, I don't know how the other commissioners think about that, but I think it's just a little odd.
Yeah, you know, I'll just say that I don't think, I'm sorry, other people are talking. Go for it.
Oh, you can go ahead. It's okay.
Oh, I just honestly don't think, I mean, there's just not a whole lot of lots where we're gonna see
Yeah.
an accessory dwelling in front of a single family house anyways. I can't see where practically we would see that often in the city of Independence. You know, we just don't have, I mean, just I can't really think of where we would start getting an accessory dwelling unit in front of a primary building.
Okay.
This is Sally. If we followed the feedback that we got from the Fair Housing Council where we would allow ADUs with no foundations, it'd be easier to park the travel trailer in front of your house and call it the ADU then.
Well, I guess if I parked it in my front yard and not in the street. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm confident that that's not what we want for the city.
Yeah, I think the argument is also like the tiny homes that are built on trailer frames.
Wheels. That's right.
Wheels. But I agree. I don't know that I specifically want to call out that it's allowed in front yards. I don't know that we would need to, because I agree with Corby. It feels a little bit odd to be very specific about calling that out. So I don't feel like we should.
Yeah, and I don't think it says foundation either. As I'm looking at it, it just says permanently affixed to the ground. So,
Right. I mean, these are recommendations in the letter, correct? I mean, these aren't something that we are required to put in there. Am I reading that correctly?
exactly. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Well, getting back to what Kate said about the tiny homes, I mean, they are on wheels. If somebody had a tiny home, obviously I can't get a tiny home into my backyard. I would imagine most people can't unless they lifted it over with a crane. Then if there wasn't language that said, no, you can't put it in your front yard, is that something that could possibly happen?
They're gonna have to meet setbacks regardless. And so I can't remember exactly, let me look up how the residential setbacks read right now.
I think because, you know, it never even crossed my mind until I read that today, that when we talked about this in previous meetings, ADUs are just standardly built in your backyard.
Right. And you know, so I mean, definitely the code does not prohibit duplex ADUs, or what they call it. Clearly, that's the code. because it talks about where they share it. That's what I would consider as a duplex ADU, right? Or you can see that accessory dwelling unit is proposed inside or attached to a single family residence. I would think that's what they're calling as a duplex ADU. Now, so let me just see the setback language. So yeah, it says that the setback for a detached accessory structure is the same as a primary structure. So if a 50-foot yard setback, the ADU would have that same setback.
Okay, so that would basically prohibit an ADU in your front yard then.
Right. Well, I mean,
unless you had a huge front yard.
A giant front yard.
Right. And again, when I look at houses, we just don't have a whole bunch of houses that are set way back from the street.
Right. Okay.
How would you permanently affix a tiny home built on a trailer chassis with wheels to the ground?
I imagine it's the same way that you permanently affix a mobile home. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to do like a cinder block foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I wondered, if you would actually end up having
other ways
a foundation.
There's other ways to do that as well. So I'm just not the building guy, so I don't know all of them. So.
Okay. Well, let's see. Since we are in a public hearing, there are no folks there to speak in favor or not in favor of. So other than we all read that letter. Any more questions of Fred before I close the public hearing? Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Comments from commissioners. If there's no comments, I'll entertain a motion on LA 2020-02.
This is Sally. I'll take a stab at it. I move that we recommend the city council approve LA 2020-02 with the modification that staff complete the goal 10 findings before the final recommendation to the city council.
Are you good with that, Karen? Okay, you must be good. A second.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes. There. Okay. Any other discussion, informational items for this evening? Other than it was nice to join you with my face.
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Corby.
Yes, and next time it'll even be better when I get my camera from my computer. So
Nice.
thankfully, I don't know why the GoToMeeting didn't work on the iPad, but it works fine with the Zoom thing. So we're doing good.
Let me know if you want a custom background once you get your camera.
I like that Star Wars stuff. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no any other information we need to discuss, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Just before that, thanks for a good discussion tonight.
Yeah.
This was,
agreed.
it was, yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Yep. That was good. That was.
And with that, I'll make a move. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, a second.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. All right.
Do I say hi to Karen?